If it should appear that the events in the next couple of hours seem precise, it is because important events such as this are carried out correctly and with the dignity that such a solemn occasion requires. And helping to put that aspect of the event in perspective is retired Major Neville Brathwaite, a 25-year veteran of the Barbados Defense Force. Major Brathwaite served on the broadcast commentary teams for the funerals of former Prime Minister Sir Harold St. John and Governor General Dame Nita Barrow. Major, thousands of Barbadians, as we just saw, are getting ready to pay their respects, and they are lining the road from Downs and Wilson Funeral Home at Eagle Hall, and as the procession will come down Barbary Hill across Westbury Road to President Kennedy Drive, and they will also be expected to turn out in their numbers when the cortege heads to the St. John Parish Church. This is certainly unprecedented.
Thank you, Doug. I couldn't agree with you more. Good morning, Barbados, and good morning, viewers. The state funeral represents a considerable honor accorded a citizen in a recognition of achievement and service to the community. A state funeral consists of a military procession via gun carriage. The body usually lies in state for 3 days or more if necessary, and then this is followed by a funeral service and interment of the body. There is no doubt that Prime Minister Thompson was indeed very popular, as we can see from the outpouring of grief and support by the people of Barbados and by those gathered here this morning. Now, there's considerable planning that has to go into an event such as this. As I said earlier, a state funeral is a public funeral ceremony held to honor heads of state and other important people, and they usually include much pomp and ceremony. And this pomp and ceremony is laid down in the Queen's Regulation for the Army. There's first of all internal preparation.
And that's what I wanted to ask you about, Major Brathwaite, because it seemed as though this process is rehearsed, and there wasn't much time actually to rehearse.
There's never much time, but the fact of the matter is that because it is laid down and the procedures are there, it is just a matter of following the procedures. For example, within the Barbados Defense Force, the Chief of Staff would have pulled together his planning team, and immediately once the death was announced and the state funeral, planning for the state funeral would start. You would have preparation of the gun carriage. It would have to be collected from Sunbury Plantation because it's not kept at the BDF, and that starts almost immediately. There's also, as we said before, there are lots of rehearsals. Funeral drills are outlined in the manual of drill, and the BDF would have started selecting persons for various appointments within the procession, and rehearsals will start immediately. There would have been a reconnoiter of the route to look at the route. It would have to be paced and timed. They would also be looking at the lying in state, those places where the body would lie in state, and preparation so that they would be appropriate for such. You also have to look at alternative plans. For example, if the weather was inclement and it couldn't be held here, the alternative plan was the gymnasium. So you'd have to look there and see what you would have to do in order to ensure that the event is executed with no less pomp and dignity. And then you have to break out all the accoutrements that would be necessary to make it fitting for the occasion. That is at the internal level. At the external level now, Cabinet Office, who has responsibility for the planning of the state funeral, will be holding a number of meetings to pull together all the agencies that would be involved. And as events change from day to day, they will be updating all the agencies on what the new requirements are. So as you can see, Doug, there is a considerable amount of planning and preparation that has to go into an event such as this.
Major, you've actually touched on a big part of state funerals, and the gun carriage that you mentioned initially as you explained the various protocols and drills that have to be followed. Certainly I'd like to share a little bit of the history, and the history of the gun carriage for state funerals in Barbados is very interesting. The gun carriage that's being used to carry the casket of the late Prime Minister David Thompson from Downs and Wilson Funeral Home to Kensington Oval, it was actually used for the state funeral of the late Dighton Ward, the second Governor General of Barbados, back in 1982. And of course, prior to this, we did not have a gun carriage for the state funeral of our first native Governor General. That would have been the late Winston Scott, back in 1976, a year after my birth, if I may add. On the occasion of the death of the late Dighton Ward, it was decided back then that it would be appropriate to have a gun carriage on which to transport his casket during the funeral procession. Brigadier Rudyard Lewis, who was the Chief of Staff, Barbados Defense Force at the time, sought to borrow one from Jamaica's Defense Force and have it flown to Barbados by, of course, United States transport plane back then, through the kind courtesies of the United States Embassy in Bridgetown. Now, that plan fell through, so he turned to his works planning officer, Captain Vernon Connell, and said, "Build me a gun carriage. You have 96 hours to produce it." And of course, now let's go back to the screen and share with you a little bit about what's happening here as the procession makes its way. This is Eagle Hall.
What is happening at Eagle Hall is that the Guard of Honor is now getting into position at Eagle Hall corner. The Guard of Honor will halt outside the Downs and Wilson Funeral Home, facing the funeral home, awaiting the bear party to bring the body, bear the casket of the late Prime Minister Thompson to the gun carriage. So we are awaiting this activity.
And of course, the mass band of the Royal Barbados Police Force and the Barbados Defense Force are following the Guard of Honor, and they will be also in position this morning outside of the funeral home. And the gun carriage will be positioned on the road outside the funeral home. And I wanted to ask you, Major, I noticed that the information provided indicates that the rear wheels of the gun carriage will be positioned 6 spaces to the southeast of the entrance of the funeral home. Why this kind of detail, and how important is this?
It is important because when the bear party exits the funeral home, there should be no obstruction in its way. It should be able to proceed from the entrance of the funeral home to the gun carriage and place the casket onto the gun carriage without any let or encumbrance. So, as I said earlier, everything is precisely timed and measured, and that is why that kind of detail appears in the instruction.
How critical is timing for this procession, Major?
Timing is very critical because the cortege must leave Downs and Wilson Funeral Home at precisely 8:25 to arrive at Kensington Oval for 9 o'clock when the start of the service. So during the rehearsals, this would have been timed precisely to ensure that the cortege arrives at Kensington Oval for the start of the service at 9 o'clock. As you would have noticed in the Guard of Honor, the flag is draped. For an occasion such as this, because of the somberness of the occasion, the colors are draped, and the drums are also draped, and the song that is produced by the drums is muffled. It is all in keeping with the somber mood of the occasion, and of course respect for the dead. So the Guard of Honor is drawn up now outside of the Downs and Wilson Funeral Home, facing the funeral home. The bear party at this time is inside of the funeral home. They would have dressed the casket, and when we talk about dressing the casket, it means simply covering the casket with the flag. Now, in the British tradition, we drape the casket canton dexter, and I will explain that. The canton, or the uppermost part of the flag, and the Guard of Honor goes into the present arms, which means that the bear party is about to come out. But canton dexter means that the upper part of the flag that is attaches to the top of the pole, or the canton, is placed over the right side of the corpse. And dexter is Latin for right, so it is canton dexter. In the American tradition, and I noted very carefully with the last state funeral of Senator Ted Kennedy, they drape the flag canton sinister, which means that the cluster of stars in the left upper quadrant of the flag is draped over the left shoulder of the corpse or the casket, or it is draped as the flag flies. So we drape canton dexter. The guard of honor is at the present arms and awaiting the appearance of the bear party bearing the casket, which they will place on the gun carriage.
And I note that once the bearer party makes its presence at the door of the funeral home, the mass band will play the general salute. Why is that?
The rule of thumb, Doug, is that whatever you're entitled to in life, you're entitled to in death. And the Prime Minister would have been, or the former Prime Minister would have been accorded a general salute in life. He would have also been accorded a 19-gun salute on ceremonial and state occasions. Being the head of government, a head of state is entitled to a 21-gun salute, which is the highest form of salute. And therefore, later on in the procession, 19-minute guns will be sounded or will be fired for Prime Minister Thompson. This might be a good time for Cassandra to pick up where she left off with the gun carriage.
All right, well, certainly. And again, it all comes together when you hear the Major explain it so well. I told you, essentially, the officer would have had just 96 hours to produce this gun carriage. Captain Connell, of course, replied enthusiastically, "Yes, sir," without any thought of how he was going to achieve this monumental feat. No, what he did was he went to the officer's mess to get a drink to sort of calm his nerves, clear his head, and collect the thoughts. And would you believe, there in a glass cabinet was a miniature replica of a silver gun carriage. Being the excellent draftsman, of course, that he was then and still is now, he took the miniature gun carriage, carefully examined it, and transposed its measurements into drawings that produced the stunning and majestic gun carriage that you will see proudly on display here today. The body of the carriage was crafted in the former Barbados Coast Guard headquarters workshop at HMBS Willoughby by some very skillful and dedicated craftsmen in all of that 96 hours we described.
And here we see the arrival of the former Prime Minister, now Opposition Leader Owen Arthur and Mrs. Arthur arriving at Kensington Oval. There are many dignitaries assembled here, including heads of government from Caribbean countries and delegations from around the world.
Indeed. Today we will hear a special tribute paid to the late Prime Minister by a former colleague and Prime Minister Bruce Golding.
A beautiful setting with the choir, combined choir, I believe it is of the Combermere School, and in the foreground is the catafalque in which the casket will sit during the service this morning.
This is the setting described as the church, and here we see the man the only living
national hero, right excellent Cigarfield Sobers.
And this is his home ground, you
Absolutely.
could say. His statue graces the pavement on the outside of Kensington Oval, and here he is as well.
Accompanied by his companion Jackie White and the cabinet secretary.
Yes.
And there is the statue of the living legend.
Yes, it must be interesting to have a statue, one that you can observe while you are indeed alive. And again, this is really a location that pays tribute to the legacy of Barbados, and that is what we are doing here today for the late Prime Minister, the Honorable David Thompson.
And the bearer party and the guard of honor.
That's the leading detachment of the escort. You will note that they are marching with their weapons reversed, And that in itself is significant. Now, when troops go to battle, they go with their rifle muzzles pointing forward. But when they are going to bury their fallen comrades, they reverse their weapons to indicate that they're not coming to fight, but to pay their respects to their fallen comrades and to lay him or her, lay them to rest with dignity. So the reverse arms are indeed symbolic on this occasion. You will also note that the mass band, the drums are draped in black, and the song that will be produced will be muffled, as the snares would have been slackened to produce a muffled sound.
Speaking of sound, this is what it's sounding like as the procession makes its way toward Kensington Oval.
Chaplain and the funeral director leading the Land Rover, which today pulls the gun carriage carrying the body of the late David Thompson on its final journey across Barbados.
The gun carriage is flanked by the military pallbearers, and on the outside is the bear party. The military pallbearers will be, in the case of the Royal Barbados Police Force, gazetted officers. In the case of the Barbados Defence Force, commissioned officers. It really means the same thing. And on the outside would be sergeants and colour sergeants of the Barbados Defence Force and the Royal Barbados Police Force, which would make up the bear party, consisting of some 8 persons, 4 on each side.
Can you explain what goes into selection of these individuals who will ultimately bear the casket to its point in the church?
Because it must be a privileged assignment.
Yes.
Well, there's a saying in the army that rank has its privilege, so therefore that would account for part of it. But you would want to select people who are essentially of equal height. You would also want to select persons who you know can execute the required drills that will be required flawlessly. So these persons will be carefully selected for their various appointments and their various jobs. Behind the gun carriage is the officer in charge of the bear party, and behind him would be the wreath bearers, 2 wreath bearers, followed by the family cars.
You talked about the selection of the bearer party. There are other people who stand vigil at the lying in state. Is the process similar as far as selection is concerned?
The persons who would stand vigil would normally be commissioned officers, in this case, for a head of state. And it is more a selection of 6 officers, an officer in charge of the vigil party, a second in command, and then 4 officers, 1 at each corner of the casket. They would go through the drills for vigil. There are specific drills for vigil, and then that party would remain together throughout to conduct vigil as required at the various places where the body will be laying in state.
Okay. Again, Barbadians have an opportunity to pay their respects by lining the streets to witness this procession as it makes its way through the city and onto the entrance. Yes.
Barbary Hill, and then Westbury Road and onto President Kennedy Drive. And this is no easy task, Major. These men and women who are performing yeoman service today when they leave Kensington, they have to reassemble in St. John to continue this process.
Yeah.
It's just all part of what we would consider the normal routine for us. And even though these events don't come around too often, the training that you would go through in your career would prepare you for the rigors of an exercise such as this. I just want to know that having started playing the Dead March in Saul, the mass band will cease to play once it reaches Richmond Gap. The procession will then break into quick time, and the mass band will beat time on their muffled drums. As I said before, the drums are muffled as a mark of respect to the dead. They are draped in black in keeping with the solemn occasion, and the song produced is much softer. Immediately following this will be the start of the 19-minute gun salute.
The 19-minute gun salute, it is that specific for a critical reason as well, I imagine,
Yes.
Major.
As a former Prime Minister and head of government, he would have been entitled to a 19-gun salute on state and official occasions. And therefore, as I explained to Doug earlier, what you're entitled to in life, you're also entitled to in death.
Passing.
That is the rule of thumb. And therefore, he's entitled to a 19-minute gun salute. The first gun salute will be sung 19 minutes out from the gate at Kensington, and the last round will be fired when the cortege reaches Kensington Oval.
Okay. You spoke just moments ago about having, though these opportunities don't happen often, there is much experience that has been gained from having to deal with state funerals of the past, and some of them would include the late Dighton Ward, a former Governor General, the late John Michael Jeffrey Manningham, Tom Adams, most people know him as, the late Hugh Springer, the late Nita Barrow, Dame Nita Barrow, the late Harold Bernard St. John, and today we see another state funeral taking place for the late David Thompson.
Yeah, and I wondered whether we could go back to the scene at Eagle Hall for a second, because I don't know if our viewers were able to notice that there was a spare hearse, a spare Land Rover, and an ambulance, and all of these are backups that add to the whole element of precision to ensure that there are no follow-ups, bleaks, or blunders.
Yes.
In a situation like this, nothing is left to chance, okay? Nothing must stop this procession from reaching Kensington Oval at 0900 hours. And therefore, if, for example, the ceremonial Land Rover pulling the gun carriage broke down, the spare vehicle, a spare Land Rover will come up, hitch the gun carriage, and continue. And that essentially is the reason why you have spare vehicles at the back of the convoy, because should any unforeseen event occur, then without missing a beat, you are able to get in there, fix it, and continue the process.
We're looking at some of the faces gathered at Kensington Oval for the service, the public service for the late David Thompson.
And thousands are expected to gather here. This morning I see former Commissioner of Police Des Watson, who is now the head of the regional security system, sitting in the congregation. Many distinguished Barbadians and visitors here today. I also believe there are many St. Lucians who paying their respect to the Thompson family. Mrs. Thompson, of course, the former Mara Girodi from Castries, and relatives of hers and other friends of the Thompsons are also visiting from St. Lucia this morning to pay respects to our former Prime Minister.
Yes. I should let you know that you are able to view today's proceedings. So there we see former opposition leader Mia Motley, also here to pay respects. I remember she explained, though they may have operated on opposite sides, certainly they would have crossed paths as professionals, and they were indeed friends.
Something that is kind of special this morning that I have noticed is the compilation of the musical tribute for the late Prime Minister. In somewhat of his final his final communication to Barbadians, he referred to the recording of We Are the World.
Yes.
And that's one of the musical tributes to be performed this morning by the children of
St. Gabriel's
St. Gabriel's as we watch Sir Garfield St. Orban Sobers.
Yeah.
And there's also another special tribute by trumpeter extraordinaire Ricky Brathwaite.
Ricky Brathwaite. He has truly honed his skill through the years. He too has given much to entertainment, and the late David Thompson was referred to as one who could be credited as having really pushed the portfolio of culture, developing culture in Barbados. So it will be great. We'll also be blessed with the voice of Paula Hines. She has truly been able to impress every time.
And there we see Dame Olga.
Yes.
Dame Olga Lopes making her way to her seat here this morning.
Yes.
And also performing this morning will be one of David Thompson's constituents, two-time Calypso monarch Adrian Clark,
Yes.
who is scheduled to do a gospel number.
Yes, he will. You can also, I should let you know, you can, if you aren't able to view our coverage on CBC TV8, you can view it at www.cbc.bb, www.947fm.bb. You can listen and follow all the way. And you can also view at www.tele.vision.com. That's
The President of the Senate, the Honorable Branford Tate, in his seat here at Kensington Oval. And when we look over at the Greenwich and Haynes stand, that is premium seating today. There are thousands gathered there. It is packed almost to capacity, unlike the Hall and Griffith stand. And because of the positioning of the sanctum here today, the Greenwich and Haynes is probably the best seating where you can get a head-on view of the service and the casket this morning. But all of these seats here are very valuable for these thousands of Barbadians who got up early this morning. As we see the St. Gabriel students getting ready to enter the backstage area for their performance in tribute to the late Prime Minister this morning.
This should be an honor for them and a great memory. Well, it's mixed feelings, I imagine, but I imagine they're also selected because this would have been the primary school he attended.
Absolutely.
This is the scene at Kensington Oval as we prepare for musical tributes for the late David Thompson.
As we see the purple draped catafalque, I wanted to ask the Major about the catafalque. Why is this used as opposed to the traditional undertaker's trolley? And what is the significance?
The catafalque is really a raised bier or platform used to support the casket, coffin, or body of a deceased during a funeral or memorial service. The term originates from the Italian catafalco, which means scaffolding. A catafalque is used because it is higher than the normal trolley, and with the huge crowd here today, you would want to be able to see the casket on display, and therefore the reason why the catafalque is used as opposed to the normal trolley, which would be much lower and much more difficult to see.
You know, like the gun carriage, the catafalque is part of the normal armory at the Defense Force?
Yes. Within the Defense Force, you will have funeral stores, and all of these implements and objects will be stored there.
There's Combermere school students as they file in to their positions as well. And some umbrellas have also come out here at Kensington Oval as a few sprinkles come across.
Showers
the
of
grounds.
blessing indeed.
Very much blessings.
Very appropriate.
Yes.
And the combined choir. performing this morning
Yes.
to the accompaniment of the Royal Barbados Police Force Band.
Of course, being directed by Dr. Christopher Atherley,
And there's former parliamentarian
Johnny
Sir
Cheltenham.
Richard Cheltenham.
Richard Cheltenham. Over
Dr.
the
Anne St. John, and the other specially invited guests and dignitaries in their seating under the tent here at Kensington Oval, awaiting the start of the funeral service for the late David John Howard Thompson.
in the distance in the front row there we see Chinese Ambassador Wei Chung and his wife. And of course, this is the space where several specially invited guests and dignitaries will be seated. One of the things we continually heard at the CBC, as we heard various tributes from friends, relatives, colleagues, the late Prime Minister always said not to panic. He always seemed to have a calm disposition, they say. And so today, even with the showers, as all things are put in place and all the backup plans are in place, we will continue to not panic. And we're going to share some of the musical tributes now from the Mass Choir. Well, it seems we came in on the ending of that song.
And here's the procession, Barbados Hill, making its way to Westbury Road, or to the start of Baxter's Road, led by 4 outriders. And again, crowd using every vantage point on Wednesday morning to see this important, if not historic, ceremony in tribute to the life of a fallen Prime Minister.
Behind the outriders, you would see the leading escort, which would comprise 48 all ranks. As I said before, whatever you're entitled to in life, you're entitled to in death, and therefore a Prime Minister is entitled to a guard of 48, or what is referred to in military terms as a half guard. And therefore, he will have, for on this occasion, 48 all ranks for the leading escort and 48 all ranks for the rear escort.
I noticed that the drum major is carrying a black flag.
The drum major, on this occasion, the mace carried by the drum major would be draped in black, in keeping with the solemnness of the occasion. The colors are draped in black. The mace is draped in black, the top of it, and
Instructions being given here.
yeah, the parade commander just gave by the right wheel, which means it's changing direction and turning right.
You can hear the muffled sound of the drums described by the major in the distance. The instructions being sounded.
The color party. You see 2 drum majors, one from the Royal Barbados Police Force, one from the Barbados Defense Force, with the maces draped in black. The mass band, wheels right. In the procession, you will see the military chaplain, Major the Reverend Mylan Springer. There's also a place in the procession for the funeral director.
That's right, James Wilson.
In the top hat.
And now you see the ceremonial vehicle towing the Land Rover. That is the ceremonial vehicle, and it has been designated as that from the first time it was used to for the visit of Queen Elizabeth II when she came to Barbados. And
What other events would such a vehicle be used for when it's not towing?
it is also used on Independence Day
Yes.
for the inspection by the Governor General, who is the Queen's representative. It is used by no other person, either the Queen or the Queen's representative. But that was the vehicle that was used when she came into the stadium. There was a display by school children,
Yes.
and it drove along the track. So that is the ceremonial vehicle of the Barbados Defense Force. And when the Governor General is in the vehicle plates are changed and GG is put on. We see the family cars following closely behind, and the Commissioner of Police, the Chief of Staff, and their ADCs.
And
Rear
this
detachment
contingent, this is the rear detachment, okay.
rear detachment of the Royal Barbados Police Force.
This is, of course, the ceremonial garb that would have been brought out for this state funeral as well.
Yes, indeed it is.
Remarkable precision here this morning, perfectly timed. Will we be able to hear any of the volleys from the 19 minutes?
We certainly should, because the saluting gun makes a considerable amount of noise, and therefore you should be able to hear the noise from the explosion of the shell as it is impacted by the firing pin.
But of course, many people think of it as a cannon, and in truth, it is not.
Well, it is referred as a saluting cannon, but it is not. It is not a huge cannon. It is a very small cannon, and it is specifically designed to execute salutes on state and official occasions.
I noticed that all officers along the route are coming to attention.
They're making their way towards the President Kennedy Drive along Westbury. So the procession is definitely closer to Kensington Oval.
And if on cue, the skies over Kensington Oval have taken on a grayer look, a more somber look this Wednesday morning.
Perhaps the skies understand what's happening here as well. Barbadians anticipating the arrival, and again you see the procession here along the roads, giving those school children and other Barbadians a chance to witness
I wonder if there's any estimate of how many Barbadians are along the route this morning. Must be a considerable amount of people. I saw people making their way hurriedly this morning as I left home, and
Yes.
And I've heard discussion among a lot of those who were vying to get that ticket to get into Kensington Oval, suggesting that they would go along the route and
Yes.
see it, and which in itself is a tribute to the late Prime Minister, that so many people will get up so early to come on out
to make their way.
and see for themselves the events unfolding today.
And we've seen some pretty thick crowds along the way. Every vantage point, sidewalks, steps, walls. People are taking every opportunity to see, and I can see from where we sit that there are people just waiting outside Kensington Oval as well. But here we are following the procession as it gets closer and closer to that point of 19 minutes for that 19-minute gun salute.
Yes, the leading escort just change arms. After a while, it is carrying your weapon or your sword on the particular arm. So therefore, the parade commander would have given the word of command to change arms, and the arms would have been put under the armpit of the right arm.
I'm glad to know that there are such considerations because we see them make it look so easy, but I imagine if you
Yeah.
try to stand still or steady for any period of time, it can become quite difficult to maintain.
I remember as a boy going to the garrison to watch the different parades, and we sort of looked forward to see who was going to faint, you know, and because we recognize just how strenuous an assignment such as this is.